And I'm going to go ahead, if everybody can mute themselves, I'd appreciate that. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second science seminar of the semester, very alliterative. I am very excited to welcome Karen Washington, who is here to talk to us. So let's see, Karen is a native New Yorker. She's from the Lower East Side and then the Bronx, right? Yay. And she is a farmer. She's a community activist. She is formerly a physical therapist. She's worked in the Bronx doing community gardens, turning empty lots into gardens. She speaks out for garden protection and preservation, and she's done just loads and loads of stuff. She is now co-owner of a farm, right? And she works on food justice, food security. So, and several of us, the botany class, a plug for my botany class, we had the chance to go and visit her and one of her partners up at the farm. And so they were wonderful hosts, and we learned a lot, and we had a great time, and it was wonderful company and just a fabulous day. So I am going to just go ahead and pass this on to Karen and let her talk to you about everything she's, good at here and share her journey with us.
Thank you, Professor Alvarez. Thank you, everybody. And yes, the students did come up a couple of weeks ago to visit our farm, and it was fabulous. It was one of the best sort of outings we've had. Lori and I were really impressed with your students, their enthusiasm, their thirst for knowledge. And so hopefully they can come again and visit our farm. It's open to the community. We are a healing farm. And so, yeah. So let's start with the first slide, because I was trying to think about a sort of a catchy sort of title. And so the title of my talk is going to be Trading Metro Cards for Tractors. And so I wanted to start out just telling a little bit about myself and the fact that, believe me, folks, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be a farmer. The fact that I grew up in an African-American household, and growing up, we were Negroes and colored at that time. And so if you're a Negro and you're a colored at that time, you did not want to go into farming, because farming was equated to slavery. I mean, you heard all the history, the Black backlash of so many of our family members that lived in the South and left the South behind to come to New York, to Chicago, a lot of urban areas, because of Jim Crow laws and segregation and racism. And so for any of us to even think about farming, no. So I took the path of least resistance, and education was the key. My mom and my father instilled in us that in order to get ahead, education was the key. So I wanted to be a scientist at one time. I wanted to be a scientist. I figured that, I would cure the ills of people. But then I found myself, next slide, as becoming a physical therapist. There I am back in 1977, Hunter College. I graduated from Hunter College. I graduated tops of my class out of 40 students. I was the only African-American in my class, and I was also graduated with honors in my class. That was my good old days, and I love being a physical therapist. I love being a physical therapist because I felt that I was doing something to better people in terms of restoring function. That is the job of a physical therapist. But also, as a physical therapist, I got a chance to take a closer look between the intersection between food and health. And so while I was a physical therapist, not even thinking about being a farmer, I saw a lot of my patients who were from farms, grew up on farms, grew up in gardens, from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from the South, and they grew up on farms. And then all of a sudden, here they are succumbing to dye-related diseases such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity. And I was a type of like a holistic physical therapist. And what does that mean? That means that I just didn't concentrate on restoring function, but I also had to make sure that my patients were taking their medication and eating properly. So I would come in my first visit and introduce myself. And then I say, I need to see your medication. So they would bring out their medication. And then I would say, I need to get in the kitchen. And they was like, Ms. Washington, what do you mean you need to get in the kitchen? I said, I need to get in the kitchen. Your diagnosis is either diabetic or hypertension, and I need to get in that kitchen to see what you're eating. So, of course, I go in the refrigerator and I open up the refrigerator, and what do I see? I see the cakes and the cookies and the soda. And then I would go into the cabinet. Now, Ms. Washington, what are you going to my cabinet for? Because I want to see what's hidden in the cabinet. And of course, the chips and the cookies and the candy. And I would say, come on now. Oh, Ms. Washington, I'm eating this food. But I said, you're a diabetic, you're hypertensive. And so what I would tell them, I said, I'm a gardener and I want to be a farmer. And they would say, Ms. Washington, how could you? I hated growing up in the South. I hated farming. And then I would talk to them about, but wait a second, what about the food that you would eat? And the fact that everything tasted so great. And then all of a sudden we would have this conversation. They would say, Ms. Washington, you're right. My grandparents lived to 100 years of age. They were never sick a day in their life. They got all their medicine and their food from the farm, from the land. And now look at me. I'm a diabetic, end-stage renal disease, a stroke, heart attack, amputations, all these things. And I started to put two and two together, is that as we've come away from the land and gone into cities and lost that contact of where our food was coming from, then I started to say there was a correlation between food and health. Next slide. And so thus my journey begins. And here where it all starts, y'all, because in 1985, I figured I'm moving on up. I'm gonna buy a brand new house, which is across the street, with a brand new house, me and my two children as a single parent. And I started with a backyard. So I had a backyard and I decided I wanted to do two things, really three things. I wanted to grow tomatoes, eggplant, and collard greens. So I wanted to grow collard greens because collard greens were a staple in my family. I wanted to grow eggplant because eggplant sounded funky, eggs on a plant. And I wanted to grow tomatoes because my mother loved tomatoes, but I hated tomatoes because tomatoes were pink and they had no taste. They were like cardboard. Excuse me. And so I decided to get some seeds. I put it in the ground. I nurtured. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, I grew stuff. And it was this tomato that changed my world, because the tomato that I grew on a vine. Who knew? Who knew it grew on a vine? Secondly, it was red. I was so used to pink tomatoes. I never thought a tomato was red. And then when I bit into it, oh, baby, the juices were flowing. I was hooked. And I wanted to grow everything. And I was so excited about growing food. I wanted to grow everything from pineapples, mangoes, you name it, but realized I couldn't do that. But I never lost that passion to want to grow food. So here I am in this brand new house. But then across the street from where I was living was this empty lot. Now, the same house that you see here was supposed to be identical to the site that you see where they're digging. But when the developer got to that spot, it was too much bedrock and he left it. And so from 1985, when I first moved in, to 1988, I would look out my kitchen window and I would see this. And can you believe that one time New York City, excuse me, had over 15,000 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. Those that could leave, they call it white flight because they moved to the suburbs. They had the money to leave. But those that could not leave got together, and next slide, and turned these empty lots into community gardens and urban farms. And it wasn't initially, folks, it wasn't initially about growing food. How could it? You know, because for so long we were under the guise of scarcity and problems and blight. And the community, with no resources from the city, got together and turned these empty lots into community gardens. So it was about beautification, it was about survival. But at what cost? Next slide. And I say that because in 1998, then Mayor Giuliani, in the middle of the night, decided he's going to auction off 100 community gardens. Now just think about 1998. You have people who are devastated because there's so many empty lots. They're coming together and turning these empty lots into community gardens. And you're thinking you're doing the city a favor because the city was undergoing a financial crisis. They didn't have any money. So it was people in underserved communities that were taking care of these empty lots so that there were places for security, safe haven for our seniors and our children, making neighborhoods look beautiful and inviting. And as a result, he figures he's going to sell these empty lots to the highest bidder. And so again, thinking about the politics of land and food in the city, I always say growing food and land issues in any municipality has political consequences, because all of a sudden people had to learn, civics 101 on the fly, and had to understand where the power was within the city. And people got together and we marched on City Hall because they told us we couldn't march on City Hall. We marched on City Hall, got the ear of the Attorney General. At that time, it was Elliot Spitzer, who said what the mayor did was wrong. And we were able to save those 100 community gardens. However, the battle was won, but the war continues, especially as we now move towards urban agriculture and also understanding the fact that land is powerful. And so how can we think about land in urban areas to provide food, but also you have to balance the need for affordable housing. And so when I go around the country and I talk to urban planners, I tell them you can do both. You can do affordable housing and add a rooftop garden or a center garden or vertical wall. But that's a conversation that we need to have in the long run, because we're at a point in time where land is valuable, but also there's a need for affordable housing. Next slide. And so in 1996, the World Food Summit defines food security as existing when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active lifestyle. So now this is 1996. And so now you have people saying, well, in poor urban and rural communities, if people want to be secure, all they have to do is grow vegetables. They have to grow vegetables and eat vegetables and fruits and exercise and give up soda and drink water, as if by magic, eating vegetables and drinking water are going to change the systemic structural racism that we see in today's society. And so for me, I started to think about the food system in a way and say to myself, Is the food system broken and does it need to be fixed? Next slide. And I say that because while I was in my garden concentrating on growing food, I started to realize that there were so many social issues that were happening. And I was hearing as I'm growing food that there were health issues around type 2 diabetes and hypertension and obesity, and finding that out of 62 counties in New York State, the Bronx ranked 62 as the most unhealthiest. I looked at the economics of it, how so many people were unemployed, had lost their jobs, that the wealth inequality within this country, whites make 11% more than Black and Latinx people. Looking at the environment, how in so many places, empty lots, incinerators, waste stations are always concentrated in poor communities and communities of color. Trucking industry going in and out of communities of color create asthma and other air pollutants. And then I looked at the intersection of housing. And I was hearing that people had no heat and no hot water and couldn't afford housing and couldn't afford their rent. And so I started to challenge the food system because I say, folks, we live in the greatest country in the world where we grow enough food and we waste enough food, and yet that food is not getting down to the people that need it the most. Next slide. And so I looked at the food system and found out that if you look at the overall food system itself, only a handful of people control the food of a population of 7.8 billion people on the planet. But yet you have a handful of people who are controlling our food system. And so what does the food system look like? Well, we've gone from diversity to monocropping based on a single commodity crop, such as corn. Farm subsidies. Farm subsidies was supposed to help the farmer back in the 1930s to make it, but now has become a cash cow. And most of the subsidies that we see, the subsidized food, ends up where? It ends up in poor neighborhoods, both urban and rural. We've gone from a local economy to a global economy because of trade agreements. Home cooking to fast food eating. And I can tell you there are a lot of people who don't even know how to cook anymore. And we've gone from seasonality to growing and eating all year round. If you think about it, you know, in New York City, we're eating watermelon and cherries and peaches in December. And so again, looking at the overall food system, who does it really benefit? Is it the haves and have-nots? Or have we reached a point where we are targeting the food system in such a way and calling it out to make sure that people understand that we have a division within the food system? And so the question that I continue to ask, does the food system, is it broken? Does it need to be fixed? Or does the food system need to change? Next slide. And I say that because if you look at our food system, you look at the fact that it's a charity-based, subsidized food systems byproduct of industrial ag that ends up in poor neighborhoods. And believe it or not, our food system wasn't like that. Our food system was once plant-based, full of vegetables and fruits and legumes, now animal-based. And as a result, our caloric intake has increased from 2,000 calories per capita to over 3,800 calories per capita, a food system that's not healthy, it's unhealthy. And so the food system for me doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to change. Next slide. And where does that change happen? It happens in communities. It happens in community because now you have to understand that the power shift from people who have been penalized and victimized by people having power over them, that shift has to come back within the hands of the community. And I say that because I live in I hate to use the word poor, because, my community, though labeled poor, are strong and resilient. And for so long, we have been labeled as scarcity with problems and neglect. And so I had to change how I looked at my community and say how strong and resilient my community is. And for people who want to come in and to help my community, the question they need to ask all the time is not what do we need, but what do we want? And I say that because asking communities what they need comes from a position of deficit. Asking us what we want comes from a position of power. And so within our community, we have to think about what social capital and communal wealth looks like. And so when we talk about social capital, what does that look like? When we talk about social capital, that means that everybody within our community has value to make decisions, that their voices matter. Next slide. Yet there are people who bring outside terms within our community. And some of the terms that I've heard people use when they talk about our communities that have limited access to food or don't live within a mile or a half of a grocery store, food deserts. And I know many of you have heard that term, food deserts. Recently, I've heard the term food swamps. And lastly, I heard the term food mirage. Now, folks, I don't live in a swamp. I sure enough don't believe I live in a mirage, and heck no, not a desert. And so I coined the term food apartheid. And the reason why I call the term food apartheid because food deserts just wasn't getting it. It's an outsider term used as a political construct and brief to sort of categorize communities. It's data driven and it doesn't get at the heart of what the problem is. So when you talk about food deserts, you're not talking about hunger and poverty. You're not talking about the issues that affect us most. I coined the term food apartheid because I wanted us to have a hard conversation regarding racism, classism, starting to have those hard conversations of an economy and a food system that deals with the haves and have not. And if we don't have those hard conversations, just reinforces a food system that caters to the inequities that we see. And so I wanted people to start having those hard conversations that we need to have about the social economic disparities we often see in communities of color. Next slide. Another term that you'll see within the food realm is the term food justice. And I tell people it doesn't exist. And they say, wait a second, what do you mean food justice doesn't exist? And I say it doesn't exist because it's been co-opted. I have seen this term used in everybody's mission, vision, padded on their RFP, out for grants, without really understanding what food justice means. And so for me, I like this definition because it says it represents a transformation of the current food system, including but not limited to the eliminating disparities and inequities. And I like this definition because of the word transformation. Food justice is a movement. It's not a passive movement, it's an active movement. So if you're working on food justice, I don't want to hear your cookie cutting definition. I don't want to hear your mission and vision statements. I want to make sure that you're working to dismantle the social injustices that you see. Next slide. And so some of the social injustices that we see is around race, is around gender, is around class. is around the lack of opportunity to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. What does that mean, self-sufficient and self-reliant? Again, that power dynamic structure that we have to make sure that the power, again, is in the hands of the community, but that the decision-making power also is in the hands of the community. We need to talk about how this country was built. How this country was built in terms of land being lost because of racist tactics, displacement, and all that G word, gentrification. We need to talk about the injustice when it comes to economics and how we have such a huge wealth disparity between Blacks and Latinx and whites in this country. The lack of living wage jobs that we need to talk about. The lack of understanding the historical content of trauma. People who have been oppressed and traumatized, believe it or not, is imprinted in your DNA. And I can attest to that. When I first started farming back in 2008, I went from community gardens to learning how to farm organically up in California. Santa Cruz have a beautiful program called CASFIS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, 6 months living in a tent, learning how to grow food organically. They had a 9-acre farm, they had a large community garden, and they had an orchard. So they had 3 sort of stages where you could learn how to grow food. And so I had my knapsack on, I'm waiting to get into my tent that I was going to live in for the next 6 months. And I saw this massive amount of farmland. And in my head started churning, Karen, you don't belong. This is slavery. You're working for the master. How could you do this? You need to go back home. And I said to myself, Karen, you're here in California. You got 2 choices. Either you're going to face this or you're going to go back home. And this is what I literally did. I went to the land, those 9 acres, took off my knapsack, and literally put both my hands into the soil. And I instantly felt that connection of belonging. And I knew that I belonged. I knew there was some sort of connection with me in that land. And for those 6 months, I was like a sponge learning as much as I can. And so even today, the imprint of oppression that was done centuries ago still imprints within communities of color or people who have been oppressed. And the last, of course, is power. Getting people to understand that power and privilege that they have, and understanding that you have 3 options with people with power and privilege. 1, you're going to share it. 2, you're going to give it up. Or 3 is going to be taken away from you. Next slide. Another phrase that people use, because once they started using food justice, then came food sovereignty. And again, co-opted, because food sovereignty was started from the peasants and the farmers of the global South. And this is what a definition from La Via Campesina states. It's the rights of peoples and government to choose the way food is produced and consumed in order to respect our livelihoods, as well as the policy that support this choice. It's about self-governance. It's about control of land ownership. It's about being able to grow your own food that is culturally appropriate. It's not about base building in terms of wealth. It's about getting people to understand their true value and the power that they have together. We call that communal wealth and base building. We as a people for so long, if you think about our power, we've lost our power. We've given up our power to big ag, to the government, to lobbyists. We work outside of our community. We bank outside of our community. We travel outside our community, never realizing that the power and strength that we have collectively is within our community, and start thinking about what does base building and wealth building look like when all of a sudden we understand what we do together in encouraging saving together, building together, having conversations about entrepreneurship, ownership, so that our resources are based back into our community, and then we can start base building, which is so, so important. Also getting people to understand their power when it comes to land, excuse me, and not the capitalistic way of thinking about land ownership and capitalism that extracts and exploits so many people, but thinking about how we become steward of the land. So many of us, so many of our families have lost our power as we went away from the land into urban areas under the guise of a better life. But we now realize how important it is to have that connection to the land, and that land ownership is powerful. And so I tell my young people, take out those Samsung Galaxies and those iPhones. And if you're able and you're lucky enough to have a great grandparent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, abuela, who grew up on farms and gardens, take down that story on how it was for them to be able to go into a field and get their food. They didn't have a grocery store. Or when someone was sick, they were able to go out and get the medicine from a plant or an herb. That they didn't think about money, that they thought about making sure that people were being fed. And if the neighbors didn't have food, they would make sure that their neighbors were fed as well. And so I want young people to understand their relationship to history, because I tell young people, if you don't document that history, I guarantee 10, 20 years from now, they'll tell you that your family never farmed or that you have no relationship to land. And I tell young people, if you are able to have land, make sure you keep that land in the family. That land is your legacy, it's your history, it's who you are. Next slide. You all got me going. So people often ask, so what are people doing? What are people doing to take back their food system? Well, a lot of people now are growing on urban farms and small farms. They understand their relationship to food and power. They want to grow food that's culturally appropriate. They understand the intergenerational relationship between elders and youth. They're promoting the next phase of agriculture, which is youth leadership. They're understanding how this country was built on the backs of enslaved and indigenous people. They understand that we must not co-opt indigenous practices, but honor their practices. Next slide. What are they doing in terms of advocacy? They're standing up when they see injustice. They're forming coalitions and cooperatives, making sure that everyone has a voice. They're talking about and standing up against the discrimination and racism that they see in this country when it comes to land access and food access. They're making sure that their politicians are accountable. They're afraid and they're not apologetic. They're unapologetic when it comes to race baiting, making sure that truth is at the center, because right now we're surrounded by falsehoods and lies. They're making sure that people understand the true history on how this country was built. Next slide. I tell people this is their homework assignment, because we need to stand up and advocate for the support of farm workers and restaurant workers and grocery workers, because now we know who the essential workers are. And I say this because it's so funny. when the country was starting to come back on track, and people were saying that, people in poor neighborhoods, they're not working because they're getting that $600 a week check and they don't want to work. No, the truth was they understood their power. And they said, if you want me to come back, you have to pay me my value. And so now you see people, again, using the power that they have collectively, demanding to be paid a living wage. And if not, what they realize is the power they have collectively, where if you're not going to pay me a living wage, we're going to come together and we're going to open up our own supermarket, our own restaurant, our own retail businesses. And that's what you're starting to see now, which is so powerful. We need to advocate and support for those that are working on getting more land, access to land, and affordable housing. And like I said, we can do both. Be open to the idea of land reparation, a hard conversation to have, especially people with power and privilege that have land. The fact that, again, thinking about base building and truth about how land has been stolen, and getting people to understand that the land that you are on was stolen, and how can we make sure that it goes back into the hands of people who have been stolen, having those hard conversations. But yet people are fear because people with power and privilege don't want to give up that power. And so they sort of negate that conversation that we need to have when it comes to land reparations. Demand healthy food and clean water because both are human rights. Support the right to save seeds. And I say that because, folks, this food system is controlled by a handful of people, namely white men. And yet, what gives them the God-given right to patent seeds? Think about who we are. We are seeds, DNA. So we allow a handful of companies to patent seeds. What do you think eventually will happen in the future? Something to think about. The right to have food labeled. If you cannot pronounce it, why is it going into your body? Speak up for hazardous working conditions at major food facility and businesses. And this is something that was really brought out to the open during COVID, when so many people in meat factories were getting sick and ill, and people tried to hide it and push it underneath the table. Make sure your elected officials are accountable. Folks, they work for you, not vice versa. Everybody on this call should know their elected official. I know all my elected officials, from my assembly person, from my senator, from my local council person, from my community board, district manager. Why not? You have a right. You put them in office. This one is somewhat difficult, but necessary. Break bread and have a meal with people you don't know. Make yourself feel uncomfortable to be comfortable. Folks, this is a time right now where people are thinking about, coming back together. But we know people, we know that neighbor or that elder that needs food. We have to start thinking about, again, that communal base building wealth to make sure people are being fed. And people who you don't normally interact with, make sure you have that conversation, or break bread, or go to a store, or feed a person that you know is hungry. Make yourself feel uncomfortable to be comfortable, to start sharing that meal and having that hard conversation. Speak up and speak out against injustice. Strive for a community that cherishes diversity and inclusion as assets. And I say that because as a farmer, we cherish and value diversity when it comes to our vegetables and our flowers and our animals. Can we do the same thing when it comes to our people? And lastly, develop and support youth leadership. They are the next generation to move this food movement, this justice movement, to another level. But we have to make sure that as we move forward, that we don't replicate the oppressive principles that have been placed upon us. Next slide. And I think that's the last slide. And I'm going to leave you with this. My quote: to grow your food gives you power. You know who and why you grew it. You grew it for yourself, your family, and your community. My name is Karen Washington, and I tell people I grow food. I feed people body, mind, and spirit. And thank you for listening. I've been talking for the last 2 weeks. I don't know if I have anything left, but I'm glad that you took a moment to sit down and listen to what I had to say and listen to about my journey when it comes to food and food justice. Definitely traded my Metro cards for tractors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Whew.
Oh my God, Karen, that was amazing.
Hey,
I can't even tell you, that was incredibly powerful, and it was in so many ways just moving, and I hope everybody else felt that also. I'm going to stop sharing this, and I am going to open it up to questions. So you can hop on and ask a question or toss it in the chat.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if I have anything left, but glad you'll listen. I guess y'all can come off chat. I mean, off the speaker and say something.
Hey, we have, thank you so much for your words. It's amazing how passionate you are about this topic. It's definitely sparked me to be able to do the same and start garden. That's from one of our students. And I got to tell you, just while people are sort of thinking of questions, and after that trip to the farm, our students are fired up to plant and really do stuff. My botany class is doing some planting tomorrow, not food, but native plants. So we're working on the environment, and so very excited about that. Madeline, you have a question?
Yeah, I came in late. I'm so sorry, but I just got off a plane. So if I remember correctly, did you have something down in the Bronx at one time?
Yeah, I'm still in the Bronx.
I saw you on PBS.
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
at that point, you're my heroine because you are unbelievable. And I loved that segment. So I think what you're doing is just so great. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so I'm still in the Bronx. I'm here. I have 10 more days, and then I'm moving to Georgia. But I'll still be farming. I tell people the address has changed, but the fierceness and the activism is still there. And so during the farming season from April to November, I'll be farming upstate. And then
we're gonna try and set up another trip with our students in the spring. So
yes, definitely.
I have
Yes.
another question. I have another question for you. So Jordan says, thank you for sharing. Can you please describe the difference between food desert, mirage, and swamp? I think they just wanted a little clarification on that.
Because I think people, when food desert first came out, people were upset with that term food desert. And so, people were like, we don't live in a desert. So then someone came up, well, then maybe we can use the word swamp. And that was even worse. It's like, really? I mean, we've gone from the desert to the swamp. And again, the outrage. We don't live in a desert and we don't live in a swamp. And then someone said, we can coin it mirage. I said, y'all are absolutely out of your minds. Out of your, it's so we're gonna tiptoe and we're not gonna, so everyone is outrageous, food desert. All right, so we're gonna name it a swamp. Really? Whoa, the outrage. No. So let's sort of make it more nice and say it's a mirage. Really, folks? It's hunger and poverty. It's food apartheid. That's what it is. And let's start talking about what it is instead of trying to say it's a desert, it's a mirage. And the thing about it, how do you think we feel? How do you think people in underserved community feel to be labeled that way? People put label on us and they don't understand how it makes us feel internally, but yet you're trying to eradicate food insecurity and trying to make sure that there's access to food, but yet you're going to label us deserts, mirage, and swamps. We have to be very careful how we label people and label the food.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that's an amazing lesson to really take to heart, because you know, sometimes you could be very well intentioned and just unaware and not talking to the people that you're trying to help, and not, yeah, and just not being aware that you're doing more damage than good by your words, you know. So I have another question. Were you ever the type of person that would eat a lot of trash food? And when I say trash food, I mean fast food. And if you did, how did changing your diet make an impact on your health?
Of course I ate fast food growing up. Are you kidding? I was a kid. I had candies and cookies and ice cream and stuff. Yeah, of course. And once in a while, I do eat ice cream once in a while. You know, when you get older, your body changes. And when you have children, you start to look at your children and say, wait a second, you were thin at one point, now you fat? Sorry for the expression. But, you know, as a mother, I started to see the change in my children, their eating habits, and saw that they looked unhealthy, you know, and started as a physical therapist. Like I said, I started to see the correlation between the food that was out there and how my patients, they grew up on farms, and now they were eating. I go into their household, and you know what? Salt and sugar is very addictive. It's very, very addictive. When food doesn't taste good enough, you want salt. And if it's not sweet enough, all those sweet tea lovers, you want sugar. Very addictive. And so the palate changes. The palate what used to mainly taste, you know, astringent, sour, bitter. Now that's going away, and your palate now is sensitive to salt and sugar. So it wants salt and sugar. It wants salt and sugar. It doesn't want anything bitter. It doesn't want anything astringent. It doesn't want anything sour. It wants salt and sugar. So yes, I changed it. And as an adult and as a farmer and a person that is looking to be healthy and want to live a long time, you know, it changed. Once I understood where my food was coming from, who was growing it, the food system, and how, let me tell you something. The food system is predicated on the fact that it makes money off of people who are poor and sick. And I say that because, folks, just picture, everybody is healthy. Hospitals make no money. Poor people, all of a sudden there's no poor people. What happens to all the nonprofits? What happens to the food pantries and soup kitchens? What happens to those things? And so again, we have to start thinking about not the problems that we have. Can we start thinking about the solution? We're in the 21st century, folks. And hunger and poverty has existed since I can remember. I am 67 years of age, and we are still tackling this problem of hunger and poverty and homelessness. We live in the greatest country where we waste enough food, right? We grow enough food, but that food, that healthy food, is not getting down to the people that need it the most. And when it is healthy, it's elitist, it's expensive. Where is Trader Joe's and food and Whole Foods in my neighborhood? I live in the Bronx. You tell me where is a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's in the Bronx?
Another question. I actually live in Chester myself. I was wondering how you were able to be involved in politics of everything. Are there town hall meetings you attend? Is it something you see on the news? I am very concerned about the seed patent you were talking about. So she wants to know how to get involved.
So let me tell you, the politics in Chester, I'm dealing with the politics that is in New York and New York City, some in New York State, for me, it started locally. You know, and I tell people, don't think about the broad issues that we have. What is it that is pressing within your local community, your neighborhood? Is it the fact that they don't pick up trash? Is it the fact that you live near a an empty lot and it's full of garbage? Is it the fact that you live near a facility that burns, incinerators and puffs of smoke? Deal with local issues and get your community involved in local issues. That's how I got started. I got started because I looked in my neighborhood. I says, where, they're asking us to eat healthy. Where are the healthy food options? So I got together with people and we said, we're going to start a farmers market. We're going to start a community-based farmers market started by 5 community gardens, reaching out to 4 rural farmers, and started that farmers market. And it started in 2004 when people said, poor people can't afford fresh fruits and vegetables. Farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because it's dangerous. And farmers don't want to come to the Bronx because it's far. Well, in order to go to Union Square Market on 14th Street, you got to come through the Bronx and Harlem. 2, poor people per capita spend more money on food than any group. 3, the Bronx is dangerous and people don't want to come. Bronx, like other boroughs, being gentrified. So, it's just like, so, we took a problem, which was lack of food access, and said, you know what? We're going to do something about it, and we're going to start our own farmers market. So think about local issues, neighborhood issues that you can tackle, and then bring out your elected officials, bring them out and show them what you're doing, and get their support and get their capital to help with what you're doing.
Okay, we have a comment and then a couple questions. So the comment, I already love to garden as a hobby, but did not realize how deeply rooted the concept of gardening and farming is in our own communities, and how so many people don't have access to things necessary to participate in that gardening and be responsible for their food sources. I also loved your words on keeping land in the family. That idea is so important and so valuable, because throughout history, even recently, those in power have stripped so many thriving communities of their families' hard-earned care for land. Thank you very much for your time. And then someone else has a question. Would you say this food issue is global or just national?
Now you know it's global. Now you know it's global because of you young folks. This food movement is not local. It's global because of social media. The social media is out there. You are talking with other people regarding the same issues. Hunger and poverty is not concentrated in just the US. It's a global issue. The fact that the majority of farmers, folks, the majority of farmers in the world are women and people of color, but yet the power and control are a handful of white men. What? And so we have to rethink about that power dynamic and shifting that power dynamic. And that shifting of power can come 2 ways. Coming together, right? Coming together and voicing your concern. And number 2, hold on to that money. If you have a company that's not doing well, don't send them your dollars. Don't. And collectively, we can make change. Hold back. Don't support them monetarily. Hold back your money. Don't support them. Come together. You know what? Just think about it. If all of a sudden Black and brown people stop shopping at Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or all these companies, what do you think would happen? Or Amazon? What do you think? One day, hopefully there'll be one day of service when the country will really understand what people of color have done for this country. One day we don't shop. One day we hold back that money until people start addressing the problems of racism in this country. One day we just don't shop and hold back that money and making people to understand the power that we have collectively. It will come. But anyway, thanks. Next question.
So this is from one of our community members that's involved in teaching. She wants to know, what are some of the ways you recommend to get young people interested in farming and agriculture?
Yeah, you know how I get people in my garden with a barbecue. Let me tell you something, I'm serious. It's about breaking bread. The smell of a barbecue and music, because people say, like, how do you get young people in your garden? Barbecue and music, and then invite them to come in. Invite them to come in. Many times we close the door. We don't let no one come in our gardens. We don't want to be bothered. Youth is too noisy. They're disruptive. So much is going on. Folks, sit down and have that conversation. Don't say that all youth are bad or all youth are troublemakers, all youth, they don't want to farm or they don't want to grow food. You'd be surprised how many want to help, but they've never been asked to help or to engage. And so you have a barbecue and some music. Yeah, they'll come.
And judging by, I mean, we were a small group, but judging by our students, once you get them there, our students just went crazy. And that moment when you told the students to take their gloves off and actually touch the earth and touch the plants,
There you go.
that was it.
That's right. Next time I'm going to have them take their shoes off.
Awesome. It makes a big difference. I mean, I used to work in Central Park, and we'd get school groups to come into the park, and especially from some of the neighborhoods like of color and that don't have, the country homes and things like that. They'd come into the park, and aside from, once they had the experience, they loved it. But when they first got there, they were afraid to touch the soil. Like it was dirty.
It's dirty.
Dirty, yeah, and
Dirty.
it's not.
It's
Yeah.
dirty. I tell you, trauma transcends generation.
Does anyone have any other? What town do you sell food in a farmer's market?
Yeah, so we were at well, not now because the season is over. So we're at Union Square, Kingston, and in the Bronx. Yeah, I guess it's time. It's 8:00. Do we have still more time? One more question.
Any other questions?
Can I just say that first of all, thank you so much for having me. I have been speaking. Everyone is trying to get me before I leave Georgia.
I caught you just in time.
It's crazy. But also, I'm going to put it out there that if your students, because it would be good to hire some students for the summer. If any of your students interested, some part-time, working on our farm, getting that experience, working for us side by side. We pay our workers more than we get paid. So think about it. I'll talk to you more, Professor Alvarez, but again, put it out there because those students, they were like, what? They definitely, if I would have said, y'all want to work now? And they say, yeah. And it was so inspirational is a lot of them, some of them are in the healthcare profession, and they want to see the correlation between food and health and land. And so there's definitely a correlation there. But thank you, folks, because guess what I'm on now? I'm on Family Zoom now, every Tuesday and every Saturday from 8 to God knows 10, 11. We've had Family Zoom for over a year and a half. Never missed it.
Wow.
And so again, it's about community and being together. So thank you all. This has been fabulous. Professor Alvarez, you are the best.
You are the best. Hey, together, well, we're the best. We love our students. We love what we do, and trying to pass it on to the students.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Getting lots of thank yous in the chat. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, everybody. I'll read the chat later, but thanks. Gotta go. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Very good, Regina. Good choice.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, she really is.